The monitor in operating room 3 had gone flat 90 seconds ago, and the single dad had it breathing again before anyone finished panicking. He did not run. That was the first thing the nurses would remember later. A patient's numbers were a green ghost on a black screen. Then they were nothing at all. And while a surgical team went rigid around the table, a man in a gray work shirt crossed the room at a walk, opened a panel most of them had never noticed, and put his thumb on a connector that had shaken loose from a night of vibration. The waveform came back like a held breath let go. Steady. Clean. His. Dr. Renata Voss pulled her mask down under her chin and looked at him as if she were seeing him for the first time, which, in a way that mattered, she was. "Careful," she said. She said it loudly, on purpose so the whole scrub corridor could hear. "Don't make me fall for the repairman." A nurse froze with a supply tray half lifted off the counter. Somebody's pen stopped moving. Cade Holloway wiped his hands on the rag that lived in his back pocket, met the surgeon's eyes, and did not look away. "Little late for that," he said. Then he picked up his cart and went to sign the work order, because a machine down the hall was overdue for a scheduled check, and machines did not care who was falling for whom. Before you keep going, decide whose name you think is printed on the safety document that saved that patient. Some answers you will not see coming. To understand the man in that corridor, you have to run 2 clocks at once. One of them starts in that hospital in the present, where everyone called him the repair guy. The other starts 9 years earlier, in a place with cleaner floors and higher ceilings, where a younger version of him did something quiet that would come back to matter more than he could have known. Keep both clocks in your head, they are going to meet. Start with the present. Cade Holloway got to the biomedical shop most mornings at 6:40, 20 minutes before he was paid to, because the overnight work orders piled up like snow, and he did not like his people wading in. There was a whiteboard by the door with his own handwriting on it, and a coffee maker that he kept alive purely out of stubbornness. He wore a gray work shirt with no name patch, because the last time the hospital had ordered name patches, they had spelled his badge title as Biomed Tech, and he had decided he would rather be nobody than be that. He cleared the board the way another man might do a crossword. A ventilator with an exhalation valve that whistled. A telemetry pack that had taken a swim in a supply closet. 3 infusion pumps flagged for their scheduled preventive checks, which meant torque specs and battery loads, and a green sticker at the end that told the nurses the machine could be trusted. Cade trusted machines the way he trusted weather. Completely and never. Walt Kessler leaned in the doorway around 7, holding his own mug, watching Cade work. Walt was 66 and mostly retired from the plant side of the building, boilers and chillers and the arteries of the place, but he came in 3 mornings a week because his wife had opinions about him sitting still. He liked to say he stayed for the coffee. He stayed for the company. "You know they invented a thing called a schedule," Walt said. "You clock in at 7. The pumps don't clock in at 7. The pumps," Walt said, "are not raising an 8-year-old by themselves." He said it kindly. Walt was the only person in the building who said things like that to Cade, which was maybe why Cade let him. At home, there was a mug on the second shelf that said "World's Okayest Fixer" in a child's blocky paint. Dishwasher faded now, because Tessa had made it for him 2 birthdays running, and he refused to retire it. Tessa was 8. She had her mother's stubborn chin and her father's habit of taking things apart to see why they worked. There was a half of a bed that Cade still slept on the left side of, out of a courtesy to a person who was not there, and there was a school pickup line at 3:15 that he had reorganized his entire life to be standing in. That evening, like most evenings, the kitchen table was a workshop. Tessa had brought home a wind-up alarm clock from a yard sale for $1, and it did not wind, and she had decided this was her father's problem and her project. They sat across from each other with the little brass guts of it spread on a paper towel between them. "The spring's fine," Tessa announced, the way she announced most things, as fact. "It's the wheel with the teeth." "The escape wheel," Cade said. "How do you know it's that one?" She held it up to the light and pointed at a tooth that had gone soft and rounded. "Because that one's tired," she said. "See? All the others are pointy and mean, and that one gave up." Cade laughed, which he did not do at work and did easily here. "That's exactly it," he said. "That's exactly what happened. One part gave up, and the whole thing stops. So we replace the tired one. So we replace the tired one." He found a wheel in the coffee can of parts he kept for exactly these emergencies, and her whole face lit like he had produced it from behind her ear. It cost him nothing. It was the best part of his day, that was the present. A capable man in a small room, on purpose, keeping the important things running, and one small person who thought he could fix anything, which he mostly could. Now, run the other clock. In the spring of 2017, Cade Holloway was 27 years old, and he had a company laptop, a rolling suitcase, and a title that took 2 lines to print. Field Service Engineer. He flew to hospitals that had problems no local team could name, and he named them. That year, the problem had a body count risk attached to it, and it belonged to a family of infusion pumps called the Meridian series. An infusion pump is a patient's lifeline turned into arithmetic. It pushes medicine into a vein at a rate measured to the 1/10 of a milliliter, and it has to be right, because the difference between right and wrong can be a heartbeat that does not come back. The Meridian pumps had a fault buried deep in their firmware, in the code that watched for an occlusion, a blockage in the line, and in the sensor that listened for air. Under a rare, specific set of conditions, the alarm that was supposed to scream stayed quiet. The pump would keep counting, calm as anything, while it did the wrong thing. Cade was the one who found the pattern. He sat in a windowless lab for 3 weeks with a stack of failed units and a logic analyzer, and traced it down to a timing collision most people would have called impossible. His manager back then, a blunt woman who had seen 100 engineers give up on harder problems, had come in on the 3rd week and found him surrounded by pumps at 2 in the morning. "You know, most people would have written this off as a bad batch," she said. "It's not a bad batch," Cade said, not looking up. "It's a bad assumption in the code, a batch you throw away. An assumption follows you into the next 10,000 units." She had stood there a moment. "Finish it," she said, "and put your name on it so nobody can bury it later." He had thought that was a strange thing to say at the time. He would understand it 9 years later in a hospital from the wrong end. Then he did the part that made the difference. He did not just fix his own units. He wrote the correction. The field safety notice that went out to every hospital that owned a Meridian pump, the step-by-step protocol for identifying the firmware version at risk, quarantining the lot, and applying the patch, carried his findings and, at the bottom of the released document, his name as the authoring engineer. The fix had his signature on it, literally. He was proud of it in the quiet way he was proud of most things, which is to say he never mentioned it. He married Rosa that same year. He thought he would do that job until he was old. 2 clocks, the mug and the document, the same pair of hands. Here is the part of the older clock that Cade did not talk about. Not to Walt, not to the nurses, not to anyone at the hospital who thought of him as the man who fixed the coffee maker. Rosa got sick in the winter of 2021. It was fast in the way that is somehow both a mercy and a cruelty. Cade was on a plane over some middle state, 30,000 feet up and unreachable when the call he needed to answer went to voicemail. By the time he landed and turned his phone on and understood, the shape of his whole life had changed while he was in the air, and he had not been in the room. Tessa was 3. She did not understand where her mother went. For a while, she waited by the window at the times Rosa used to come home, and Cade learned that there is no repair for that, no part in a coffee can, and that the only thing to do is sit by the window with her until the waiting turns into something a child can carry. What she understood in the end was that her father was suddenly, permanently there. The people who knew him then expected him to be angry, or at least loud, about the unfairness of it. He was neither. He did the math of his life on a single sheet of paper one night, the mortgage and the daycare, and the miles between a good job and a small girl, and in the morning he made a decision and never revisited it. Cade turned in the laptop and the rolling suitcase. He took a stationary job at a regional hospital 40 minutes from the house, a job that paid less than half of what he had made and asked a fraction of what he could do. And he did it without one word of complaint, because it let him be standing in a pickup line at 3:15. People at the hospital assumed the repair guy had always been the repair guy. He let them. It was easier than explaining that he had folded a career into a lunchbox on purpose. He did not shrink. He chose a smaller room, and he chose it for her. The 2 clocks ran on, quietly, for years. And then, in the spring of 2026, something arrived at the receiving dock that made them start ticking toward each other. It came on 3 pallets, shrink-wrapped, at a price that made the purchasing office send a thank-you email to the new chief operating officer. Grant Whitlock had been at the hospital for 4 months and had already made himself known as a man who found money in places other people had left it lying. The pallets were infusion pumps, new to the hospital, not new to the world. Cade was in the biomed shop when the delivery manifest crossed his desk, and he read the model line the way you read the name of an old acquaintance you have complicated feelings about. Meridian Series. He read the lot numbers, and his stomach did something slow and cold. He knew those lot numbers. Not these exact units, but the range, the firmware band, the specific window of manufacturing that the field safety notice, his field safety notice, had flagged 9 years earlier. Someone had bought a warehouse of refurbished pumps at a discount that was too good, and the discount was too good because the units were old enough to carry a fault that a younger Cade had personally chased into the ground. Walt wandered over with his mug and read Cade's face before he read the manifest, which, after 5 years, he could do. "That's the look you get when a chiller's about to die on a Friday," Walt said. "What is it?" "These pumps," Cade said. "They're from a run that had a problem, a bad one. It got corrected years ago, but only if somebody applies the correction, and somebody bought these because nobody was going to." "How bad?" "The kind of bad where the machine tells you everything is fine while it isn't." Walt looked at the pallets, then at the thank-you email still open on the screen, praising the new chief operating officer for the savings. "So, the cheap ones are cheap," he said slowly, "because they're the dangerous ones." "That's usually why cheap is cheap," Cade said. He did what a careful man does. He pulled one from the pallet, powered it up, and checked the firmware version against the number he still, absurdly, knew by heart. It matched the at-risk band. For a moment he just stood there with the pump in his hands and let himself feel how strange it was to be 40 minutes from home in a gray shirt with no name patch, holding the exact ghost he had put to rest almost a decade earlier. He could have walked away from it. He could have decided it was someone else's problem now, that the man who chased firmware faults into windowless rooms had been left behind on an airport tarmac in 2021, and that the repair guy only had to keep the coffee maker running and be in the pickup line. nobody would have known. That was the quietest, ugliest version of the temptation, and it lasted about 4 seconds. Then he set the pump on the bench and ran it through a test cycle, and on the third cycle, with a deliberate partial occlusion in the line, the pump did the exact wrong thing. It kept counting. The alarm that should have screamed stayed quiet for 11 seconds longer than any pump is ever allowed to. He watched the seconds tick with a stopwatch in his hand, and each one landed like a small stone, because he was not counting a test. He was counting what a patient upstairs would not have. 11 seconds, on a real patient, on the wrong drug, is a catastrophe. Cade sat with that alarm in the quiet shop and felt the 2 clocks in his chest line up. Somewhere in those same days, Renata Voss started finding reasons to come to the biomed shop. The first time was legitimate. A caster on her instrument cart had gone wobbly, and she pushed it down herself rather than wait on a ticket. And Cade fixed it in about the time it takes to tell about it. And she watched his hands and asked one real question about how the wheel locked, and he answered it like it was a real question instead of a surgeon making conversation. The second time, the caster was fine. She said it was loose. It was not loose. Cade checked it, said, "Seems solid to me," and Renata said, "Check it again." And he did, because he was not the kind of man who told a person they were lying about a wheel. What Renata would not have admitted, even to herself, was how the shop had started to feel like the one room in the building where nobody wanted anything from her. Everywhere else she was Dr. Voss, the surgeon they woke at 3 a.m, the name on the schedule that made residents stand straighter and administrators calculate. In the biomed shop, she was a person leaning on a bench watching a man work, and the man did not perform for her, did not name drop, did not flirt in the practiced way she had learned to deflect like sneezing. He handed her a coffee from the stubborn machine once, wordless, because she looked cold, and then went back to a ventilator and she stood there holding it, and realized she could not remember the last time someone had given her something without it being a transaction. She started keeping a mental list of reasons to go down there, and pretending the list was about equipment. She was young to be as good as she was, and she was very good, and she had built a wall out of that goodness that most people bounced off of. Cade did not bounce off it. He did not try to get over it either. He just stood next to it, holding a wrench, and after a while she found that she was talking. Would you flag a fault that makes powerful people look cheap and lands your budget on a chopping block? Or would you keep your head down for your kid's sake? Keep your answer. You will want it later. Cade did the thing that was right and slow and correct. He wrote it up. He filed an incident report on the tested pump, referenced the historical field safety notice by its document number, and put a physical hold tag, bright orange, on the entire lot, which meant no unit from those pallets could go to a floor until quality signed off. He did it through the proper channels, through his supervisor, a decent, tired woman named Dana Reyes, who had 2 kids and a mortgage, and a way of rubbing the back of her neck when the world got heavier than her paycheck. Dana read the report twice. "You're sure?" she said. It was not really a question. "I wrote the correction for this fault, Dana." She looked at him for a long moment, and he watched her decide whether to ask what that sentence meant, and watched her decide she did not have the strength to know. "I'll take it up," she said. She took it up, and it came back down on Cade like a roof. Grant Whitlock's office had a view and a glass wall and a chair that cost more than Cade's car. Whitlock did not offer him the chair. He stood, so Cade stood, and Whitlock talked about partnership and stewardship and the reality of running a hospital in a hard market, and then he got to the point wearing a smile. "These pumps passed inspection at the vendor," Whitlock said. "Your bench found a nuisance alarm. That happens. What I cannot have is my biomed department putting an orange tag on a 200-unit purchase because one of my technicians has a feeling. It is not a feeling. It is a documented firmware fault with a national field correction. The document is public. My hold tag is correct. Whitlock's smile did not move, which was how Cade knew he had heard the word public and filed it somewhere for later. You are the repair guy, Whitlock said gently, the way you might explain a rule to a child. You are very good at fixing what is broken. Repair guys do not stop hospital purchases. Do you understand the difference? Cade understood it perfectly. He had understood that difference for 5 years. He just had never been asked to pretend the difference was the truth. Let me ask you something, Cade said evenly. If that lot goes to the floors, and one of those pumps does, on a patient what mine did on my bench, whose name is on the purchase order? For a half a second, the smile flickered, and Cade saw that Whitlock had already thought about exactly that, and had a plan for it. And the plan was a technician with a feeling and a paper trail that ended at Dana Reyes and not at him. Nobody's name is on anything, Whitlock said, because nothing is going to happen, because there is nothing wrong with these pumps except an alarmist in a gray shirt. He came around the desk, not threatening, worse than threatening, friendly. I am trying to help you here. You have a kid. This is not the Hill. It is exactly the Hill, Cade said. That is the whole problem with it. He said, the tag stays until quality clears it. We'll see, said Whitlock. And the 2 words had a door in them, and Cade heard it close. By the next morning, the orange tags were gone from the pumps, and the work order that carried Cade's hold had been changed in the system to closed, cleared for use, and the name on the change was Dana Reyes. He found her in the supply corridor, and he did not raise his voice, because he never raised his voice, and because he had already understood most of it before she said a word. He came to my house, Dana said, and her hand was on the back of her neck. Not like a threat, worse than a threat, he was nice about it. He talked about restructuring. He talked about how many positions the outsourcing vendor would keep and how many they would not. And he looked at a picture of my kids on my desk while he said it. Cade, I have 2 kids and a mortgage and no husband to fall back on. Same as you, and I am not as brave as you, and I am so sorry. I know, Cade said. And he did know. He was not going to spend 1 ounce of what he had on being angry at a scared person. He was going to spend it on the pumps. That night, after Tessa was asleep with the hall light on the way she liked it, Cade sat at the kitchen table where the world's okayest fixer mug lived and did the careful, boring, unbeatable thing. He did not delete his report. He exported the device event logs from the tested pump before anyone thought to wipe them, with their timestamps and their firmware strings and their damning 11 seconds. He photographed the lot numbers on the pallets. He wrote a plain email, no anger in it, to Dana, to the quality director, and to the hospital's patient safety officer, attaching the historical field safety notice, the one with his own name printed at the bottom as the authoring engineer, next to the exported logs that showed the same fault living in their building right now. He did not send it to Whitlock. He did not send it to the newspaper. He sent it up the exact ladder a careful man is supposed to climb, and then he went to bed on the left side of it. He told Tessa nothing about the danger. In the morning, over cereal, he said only that he might be changing jobs soon, and she looked up with cereal on her chin and said, "Do they have machines there too?" And he said, "Everywhere has machines, kiddo." And she nodded, satisfied. And that was the whole of the conversation. And it steadied him more than any lawyer could have. Guess what surfaces first? The man's past or the pump's fault? Keep watching. They are about to arrive at the same second. It happened in operating room 3, which is where the first clock started. A woman was on the table under Renata Voss's hands, and a pump on the newly uncleared, quietly returned to service lot was pushing a drug into her arm at a rate that had to be exact. The occlusion happened the way occlusions do, small, ordinary, a kinked line under a drape. The pump should have alarmed. It counted on, calm as anything, for those 11 stolen seconds, and in an operating room, 11 seconds is the length of a very bad dream. A circulating nurse called for biomed. Cade was 2 doors down with his cart, and he was in the room before the second sentence of the page finished, and he did not run. He read it in a glance. He saw the model, saw the lot sticker that should have been quarantined, saw the flat calm of a machine that was lying. "Talk to me," Renata said, not looking up from the field, her voice flat and fast the way it got when the room needed to be calm, and she was the one who had to make it so. "What is it?" "Occlusion alarm failure. Same fault I tagged. I have got it." He was already moving. He swapped the pump for a known good unit from his own cart, restarted the infusion by hand at the rate on the chart, watched the new machine take the load and hold it, and only then let a breath out. Then he isolated the failed device, unplugged it, taped over its power port so no one could casually reset it, and set it on the bottom shelf of his cart with his body between it and the room. "Nobody touches this unit," he said quietly, to no one and everyone. "It is evidence now." "Evidence of what?" said the anesthesiologist. "Of the thing I have been trying to tell this hospital for 2 weeks," Cade said. And he did not raise his voice, and somehow that was worse than if he had. Renata never took her eyes off her patient, but when her hands were free and her patient was safe, she looked across the table at the man in the gray work shirt guarding a broken machine like it was a witness, and something in her face changed and did not change back. You know the corridor scene already. The green line coming home, the mask coming down. Don't make me fall for the repairman. Little late for that. Now you know what the machine was, and you are beginning to guess whose name is on the paper. The near miss forced a review. Hospitals cannot pretend an 11-second alarm failure in an operating room did not happen. Within a day there was a meeting in a room with a long table, quality and risk, and the patient safety officer and Dana Reyes with her neck-rubbing hand held very still, and Grant Whitlock at the head of it, wearing his smile, ready to explain that a technician had a feeling, and a machine had a hiccup, and everyone should be calm. The quality director had the failed pump's exported logs. She had the firmware string. And she had, printed and set in the middle of the table where everyone could see it, the National Field Safety Notice for exactly this fault, pulled from the manufacturer's public archive, because that is what quality directors do when a device fails the way this one did. "For the record," she said, "the corrective protocol we should have followed on intake is this one. It is 9 years old. It is specific to this firmware band, and I want to note, because it is relevant to how seriously we take the technician who flagged this lot, that the authoring engineer listed on this field safety notice is a current employee of this hospital." She turned the page so the name faced the head of the table. Grant Whitlock read the name Cade Holloway on the safety document that governed the very pumps he had ordered his repair guy to stop tagging, and for the first time in 4 months his smile came off like a sticker. For a long moment nobody at the table said anything. The patient safety officer read the name twice, as if it might change. Dana Reyes put her hand over her mouth. Whitlock opened his mouth to say the word alarmist, and found that the word no longer fit in the room, because you cannot call a man an alarmist about a fault he personally documented for the entire country 9 years before your rebate cleared. Walt Kessler was in the room, because Walt was on the safety committee in his semi-retired way, and Walt said the thing out loud that the whole table was thinking. "You wrote the fix," he said to Cade, "and they called you the repair guy." "I never corrected them," Cade said. It was the only thing he said in the whole meeting. It didn't seem important. I was wrong about that part. The gap between how Cade had been seen and who he actually was collapsed right there on the table, in his own printed words, with no speech from him at all. He had not announced himself once. He had simply, quietly, been correct for 9 years, and the paper caught up. What came after was not a victory lap, because that is not what this hospital or this story is for. It was procedure, which is colder and better. The safety committee, then the board, laid it out in the flat language of committees. The discount that was too good. The refurbished lot old enough to carry the flagged firmware. The vendor rebate that had routed through a channel that put money closer to the chief operating officer than to the hospital. The hold tag that had been correct. The work order that had been altered. The email a careful man had sent up the proper ladder and preserved. When it came to a vote on whether to keep the biomed department in-house and to refer the purchase for outside audit, the chair called it aloud, the way it is supposed to be done. The motion carried, 7-1. Grant Whitlock was walked out that afternoon by 2 people from security who were unfailingly polite, and he took his smile and his rebate trail with him, and this story is not going to spend another word on where he went, because he did not earn any. The grace in the room went somewhere else, on purpose. Dana Reyes stood up in that meeting before anyone asked her to and handed the risk officer a printout of the altered work order, with her own name on the change, and said, in a voice that shook and did not stop, "I closed his hold tag under pressure. I want that on the record next to my name because he is not going to say it and someone should." She could have stayed quiet. The logs might never have needed her. She spoke anyway, and it cost her something to do it, and the room saw that. She kept her job. The board, once it understood the full weight that had been leaned on her, understood that a scared, honest person who comes forward is worth more than a brave one who never wavered, and rarer. Cade was not asked to forgive Whitlock and did not, because it was not his to do, and he was not that interested. But when Dana would not meet his eyes in the corridor afterward, he stopped her, and he said, "You told the truth when it was hard. That is the only part that lasts." And that was forgiveness, and it was hers, and it was enough. Cade sat with all of it that night in the small kitchen. Being proven right, he was finding, felt a great deal less than people imagined it would. It did not bring Rosa back. It did not add an hour to a day. What it did was let him keep standing in a pickup line at 3:15, and that, it turned out, had been the entire point the whole time. Tessa climbed onto the chair next to him. Too old to be a baby, and too young to be sent to bed without a fight, and she asked the question children ask. "Did you win?" Cade thought about how to answer that honestly to an 8-year-old. "I told the truth about a machine that was going to hurt somebody," he said. "And people listened, so yeah, I think we won." "We," Tessa repeated, pleased to be included, and leaned her head on his arm. Walt found him a few days later in the shop and gave him the perspective that only a man of 66 gives, which is the kind you did not ask for and needed. "You know what almost got you," Walt said, settling onto a stool with the care of a man whose knees kept score. It wasn't Whitlock. Men like Whitlock are weather. They come, they blow things around, they leave. What almost got you is that you'd spent 5 years letting people believe you were small, and you got so good at it you nearly believed it yourself. Cade didn't argue, because it was true. "They'll offer you the road back now," Walt went on. "The travel job, the 2-line title, the money." He sipped his coffee. "You going to take it?" Cade looked around the small shop, at the whiteboard in his own handwriting, at the stubborn coffee maker, at the green stickers that told the nurses a machine could be trusted because he had made it so. "No," he said, and he was a little surprised at how easy it was to say. "I already have the job I want. I just want them to stop pretending it's small." They did stop pretending. The hospital kept biomedical engineering in-house and put Cade in charge of device safety for the whole system, which meant that no pump, no ventilator, no monitor came through the door without a man who had literally written the book on one of them looking it in the eye first. He accepted it with one condition, which he stated plainly and without embarrassment, and which the board granted without a blink. He kept his hours. He was standing in the pickup line at 3:15, always, for as long as an 8-year-old needed him to be. And Renata Voss, who had built a wall out of being excellent and had found exactly one person who neither climbed it nor bounced off it, started finding legitimate reasons to be wherever Cade was, and then stopped bothering to make the reasons legitimate. It was not a grand thing. This is not a story about a grand thing. It was a coffee, the plain kind, in the plain cafeteria, that neither of them called a date because calling it that would have made it too big to hold. It was Renata asking about Tessa the way she asked about a wheel lock, like the answer was real information she wanted. It was Cade telling her about Rosa once, plainly, and Renata not filling the silence afterward with anything, which was the kindest thing she could have done. "Can I ask you something?" she said, on the coffee that was not a date. That day in the operating room, you could have let that pump go to a floor and been proven right in a much bigger, much worse way. You would have been the hero who tried to warn everybody. Why didn't you want that? Cade turned his cup a quarter turn on the table before he answered. "Because being proven right that way costs a patient," he said. "There's a kind of right you should never want to be. My wife used to say the point of knowing how something breaks is so it doesn't get to." He shrugged, embarrassed at having said that much. "I just try to be the reason it doesn't get to." Renata looked at him for a while. "The repairman," she said, softer than she had said it in the corridor, without an audience this time. "That's me," Cade said. The verdict, in the end, came from the only judge in Cade's life whose ruling was final. Tessa met Renata over pancakes on a Saturday, studied her with the frank suspicion of the 8-year-old, and reported her findings to her father in the car afterward. "She asks you real questions," Tessa said, "not fake ones." "That's true," Cade said. "I like that," Tessa said, and went back to her window, and that was the whole trial and the whole verdict, and Cade drove home with 3 chairs waiting at a table that had held 2 for a very long time. Late that night, the dishes done, the hall light on, Cade stood in the kitchen holding the mug that said, "World's Okayest Fixer" in a child's faded paint. Tessa came in for her second glass of water, the negotiated one, half asleep on her feet. "Dad," she said, into the quiet, "what do you even fix all day?" He thought about the pumps and the ventilators and the monitors, about firmware bands and hold tags, and a document with his name at the bottom, about the difference between being called small and being small, which are not the same thing and never were. "The important stuff," he said. Tessa nodded like that was obvious, which to her it was. "He fixes the important stuff," she told the room, to no one, the way children announce settled facts. From the doorway, where she had let herself in with the ease of someone who was going to be doing that a lot, Renata Voss set down 2 coffees and smiled. "Yeah," she said, "he does."